So, in context of some of the past videos that I have done concerning the Gentiles versus Israel, the Romans versus Israel, um, I want to talk about the Sabbath day, but in a different way that you have been told by your preachers. What does a Sabbath day really mean? What is it? What is it for? Let's get started with Romans 14, verse 1. Him that is weak in the faith receive you, but not with doubtful disputations. For if one believes that he may eat everything, another who is weak only eats herbs. Let him not that eats despise him that does not, and let not him which eats not judge him that eats. For Jehovah has received him, or received them both. All right, I'll give a little bit of my opinion on this. I've been a meat eater all my life, and because of gout, I've had to cut way back on meat. I can't hardly eat any meat at all now. Doesn't make me a vegetarian, and if people who eat a lot of meat, I have nothing against their way of eating. It does not offend me. Why should it? You see, who are you that judges another man's servant? To his own master he stands or falls. In other words, you're not his master. Yes, he will be held up, for Jehovah is able to make him stand. One man esteems one day above another, another man esteems every day alike. Now, the word esteem, this appears to be saying, I say appears to be, because to bring in full measure, to fulfill here, one another esteems every day in full measure. In other words, one man esteems one day above another, another man esteems all days have their full potential, or maybe it should read all days are holy. Okay? Let every man be fully persuaded in his own mind. He that regards the day regards it unto the master, and he that regards not the day to the master, he does not regard it. And he that eats to the master, for he gives Jehovah thanks. And he that eats not, or he that is a vegetarian, to the master he eats not, and he still gives Jehovah thanks. You see. For none of us lives unto himself, and no man dies unto himself. For whether we live unto the master, and if we die unto the master. Whether we live or die, we belong to the master. For to this end Messiah both died and rose and revived, that he might be master both of the living and the dead. So why do you judge your brother? Or why do you set at naught your brother? For we will all stand before the judgment seat of Moshiach. Now, let's go back. Let's go back to Exodus. Right? Sign of the Sabbath. Verse 12, and Jehovah spoke unto Moses, saying, speak you also to the children of Israel. Did he say speak to the Gentiles? No, he said speak to the children of Israel, saying, verily my Sabbaths you shall keep. For it is a sign between you and me throughout your generations, that you may know that I am Jehovah that does sanctify you. And you shall keep the Sabbath, therefore, for it is holy unto you. Everyone that defiles it, sullies it, tramples on it, or breaks it in any way, shall be surely put to death. We've got a problem here, folks. Because the new covenant is forgiveness of sin, and there's clearly no forgiveness of this sin here in the old covenant. And then he goes on to describe, for whosoever does any work, occupational work, that soul shall be cut off from among his people. 6 days may work be done, but in the seventh is the Sabbath of rest, holy unto Jehovah. Whosoever, I mean, he lays it down. It is unequivocal. Does any work in the Sabbath day, he shall be surely put to death. Now, it says there's even going to be a perpetual covenant signed between me and the children of Israel forever. Not the Gentiles, the children of Israel. All right. So if you're going to keep the Sabbath, if you claim you're going to keep the Sabbath, okay, and your neighbor doesn't, you have to go and kill him. He says shall be put to death. This is one of the things that brought a curse upon Israel. They couldn't keep the Sabbath. History shows that they couldn't. In the wilderness, when they were given manna, the very first thing that they were told was they're not supposed to work on the Sabbath. And what happened? They went and picked up manna on the Sabbath. It says right here that they were all supposed to be killed, were they? As we read again, for whosoever does any work therein, that soul shall be cut off from among his people. It says he will be put to death and cut off from among his people. That was the judgment. That was the ordinance. That was the conviction. Okay. That got Israel in trouble. Because the Sabbaths were not only the seventh-day Sabbath, it was the land Sabbaths, it was all the holy days. It got Israel in trouble, big time. So, what I want to do is in Acts. I want to go to Acts. Not sure if I want to go to Romans or Acts first. 15, Acts 15. Verse 1. And certain men which came down from Judea taught the brethren and said, except you be circumcised after the manner of Moses, you cannot be saved. When therefore Paul and Barnabas had no small dissension and disputation with him, they determined that Paul and Barnabas and certain other men should go up to Jerusalem unto the apostles, the elders, about this question. Now remember, Moses violated the circumcision law. He was the very first one who did it. Moses, the testator of the old covenant, was the first one who violated the law of circumcision. Well, the first one recorded. And certain of them should go up to Jerusalem unto the apostles and the elders about this question, to the 12, and consult with them, because there is a problem. And being brought on their way by the church, they passed through Phoenicia and Samaria. That would, I guess, would be Lebanon and Samaria, declaring the conversion of the Gentiles, and they caused great joy unto all the brethren. And then they were there, come to Jerusalem, and they were received in the church of the apostles, the elders, and they declared all the things that Jehovah had done with them. But there arose certain of the sect of the Pharisees, which believing, and who were believers. But they said it was needful to circumcise them and to command them to keep the law of Moses. And to keep the law of Moses. If you're going to keep the law of Moses, anyone who is found breaking the Sabbath must be executed. Anyone who breaks the Sabbath, I think I said that right, must be executed. If you're going to keep the law of Moses. And the apostles and the elders came together for to consider of this matter. And when they had been much disputed, Peter rose up and said unto them, Men and brethren, you know how that a good while ago Jehovah made a choice among us, that the Gentiles by my mouth should hear the word of the gospel and believe. And Jehovah, who knows the hearts, bore them witness, giving them the Holy Spirit, even as he had done unto us. And this is while they were not circumcised. This is while they were not keeping the law of Moses. And he put no difference between us and them, in purifying their hearts by faith. Yes, the same faith by Abraham. Jehovah made the promises to Abraham before he was circumcised. Jehovah made no mention of the Sabbath to Abraham at all. You can't find it. I dare anybody to find it, to prove otherwise. Now therefore, why do we tempt Jehovah to put a yoke upon the neck of the disciples, which neither our fathers nor we were able to bear? Why did he say that? Because every single Israelite apparently was guilty of breaking the law of Moses in some way, one of which was the Sabbath. And you know what the requirement was: put them to death. You're going to tell me that the Jews today keep the Sabbath, even those that live in the land of Israel? You're going to tell me that they keep the Sabbath? You're going to tell me that they don't do any work at all in the Sabbath? He says, which neither our fathers, that's the people of Israel, nor ourselves today were able to bear. But we believe that through the grace of Yehoshua, the Master Yehoshua, Messiah, we shall be saved, and so shall they. And then all the multitude kept silence and gave audience to Barnabas and Paul, declaring what miracles and wonders Jehovah had wrought among the Gentiles by them. And after they had held their peace, James answered, saying, Men and brethren, listen to me. It says Simeon, they should read Peter, have declared how Jehovah at first did visit the Gentiles to take out of them the people for his name, and to this agree the word of the prophets, as it is written, After this I will return and build again a tabernacle of David, which is fallen down, and I will build again the ruins thereof, and I will set it up. And the rest of the men might seek after Jehovah, and the Gentiles upon whom my name is called, saith Jehovah, who does all these things. Know unto Jehovah that all his works from the beginning of the world. So he declared these works from the beginning of time. These things were already known from the beginning. Wherefore, my sentence is that we trouble them not. which from among the Gentiles are turned to Jehovah, but that we write unto them, for they abstain from pollution of idols. It is any other God, any other false God, with the exception of Jehovah. And from fornication, and from things strangled, and from blood. No strangled meats, no fornication, any sort of pollution from idols, that means names included, and from shedding or eating blood. Because Moses of old time has in every city them that preach him, being read in the synagogues every Sabbath day. All right. So then it pleased the apostles and the elders with the whole church to send chosen men of their own company to Antioch, with Paul and Barnabas, namely Judas surnamed Barsabbas, and Silas, chief men among the brethren. And they wrote letters by them after this manner: the apostles and the elders and brethren send greetings unto the brethren which are the Gentiles in Antioch, Syria, and Cilicia, mainly Syria and Turkey. Forasmuch as we have heard that certain which went out from us have troubled you with words, subverting your souls, saying you must be circumcised and keep the law, to which we gave no such commandment. Remember, if a congregation is going to keep the Sabbath as written in the law, as written in the Torah, law of Moses, okay, and somebody, whether by accident or by will, breaks the Sabbath by doing some sort of work that's not permitted, they're going to have to kill them. But yet we just read Paul saying, why are you judging another man's servant? You see, concerning Sabbaths. We gave you to whom we gave no such commandment. It seemed good unto us, being assembled with one accord, to send chosen men unto you, with our beloved Barnabas and Paul, men that have hazarded their lives for the name of our Master Yehoshua Messiah. Don't forget, this is a name of idol right here. Those names are not supposed to come out of our mouths still. We just read right here, abstain from all pollutions of idols. This is a name of an idol right here. So you say our Master Yehoshua Messiah instead. We have sent therefore Judas and Silas, who shall tell you the same thing by mouth, for it seemed good to the Holy Spirit and to us to lay upon you no greater burden than these necessary things, that you abstain from anything offered unto idols. Anything. And from blood, murder, eating blood, or from anything strangled, and from fornication, from which if you keep yourself, you shall do well, fare you well. But see, the judge is now Yehoshua Messiah. We can no longer throw stones at people for not keeping the Sabbath, because, quite frankly, if we did, we'd have to cast the first stone at ourselves, which was the whole reason for forgiveness of sin to begin with. That's what the new covenant is all about to begin with, is it not? Haven't I gone over this so many times? One of the portions, one of the requirements for the new covenant is that Jehovah, our Father in heaven, whose name is holiest of all, will forgive Israel's sins. One of them being breaking the Sabbath, because all Israel, great and small, has broken the Torah, have broken the laws in the old covenant, which is why the old covenant had to be replaced. I cannot say this enough. I guess we should go to the new covenant just to make sure all understand. Hebrews 8. For if the first covenant had been faultless, there should have been no place be sought for the second. For finding fault with them, Israel, he said, Behold, the days come, saith Jehovah, that I will make a new covenant with the house of Israel and the house of Judah, not according to the covenant that I made with their fathers in the day when I took them by the hand to lead them out of the land of Egypt, because they continued not in my covenant, and I regarded them not, saith Jehovah. For this is the covenant that I will make with the house of Israel after those days. That's after the time of the Gentiles have come to an end. Saith Jehovah, I will put my Torah into their mind. In other words, they will naturally, by nature, they will keep the laws that were written. There won't be a need to have an executioner ready in case somebody breaks the Sabbath. There won't be any need. Why? Because they will do these laws by nature. It will come naturally. In their mind, and write them in their hearts, and I will be to them an Elohim, and they shall be to me a people. And they shall not teach every man his neighbor and every man his brother, saying, Know Jehovah, because they're all going to know him from the least unto the greatest. And this is the kicker right here. Right here. For I will be merciful to their unrighteousness. I will be merciful to their unrighteousness. All right, let me ask you this. We read here. Verse 14 in Exodus 31. You shall keep the Sabbath, therefore, for it is holy unto you. Every one that defiles it shall be surely put to death, for whosoever does any work therein, that soul shall be cut off from among his people. We already know that Israel violated that over and over and over again. We know that Israel violated the old covenant over and over again. So the old covenant is dead. The only thing that's left now is faith in the promise of the new covenant. That's the only thing that is left. The faith in the promise of the new covenant. Because there's going to come a time, after the time of the Gentiles is over, Jehovah is going to pour out his Holy Spirit upon all Israel, and it will be in their nature to keep those laws and the statutes and judgments. It will be in their nature. There will be no need for an executioner to enforce the law. It won't be any need. If you're going to believe what this says here, if you're going to believe it, their sins and their iniquities will I remember no more. And that he says, a new covenant, has he made the first one old, which now is decayed and waxes old and ready to vanish away. And of course, it did. It's gone. The old covenant is gone. And now, since the old covenant is gone, we have to live by faith until the new covenant is instituted upon Israel in Jerusalem. So who's going to condemn another person over the Sabbath if there's a promise of forgiveness of sins? Who is going to be condemned over the controversy of the Sabbath? I'll tell you who will. The man who condemns another man. Remember what Paul said in Colossians. Was it Colossians? Was it in Galatians? Let's go to Colossians. Okay. Oh, yeah. Verse 16, 2 and verse 16. Let no man judge you in meat and drink in respect of any holy day or any new moon or of the Sabbath days. For they are a shadow of things to come. What do you mean a shadow of something to come? How is the Sabbath a shadow of something to come? I will get right to it. It says, but the focus is the Messiah. Okay. Let me show you how it is a shadow of things to come. I want to go. I got to start using Aramaic version as much as I can now, because this might end up being a stumbling block for a lot of people. Now, if I can just find it. Bear with me for a second here. I'm going to see if I can find it. Version right here. Aramaic plain English. All right, and at that time, Yehoshua was walking on the Sabbath in the grain fields. And his disciples were hungry, and they began plucking the ears of grain, and they were eating. But when the Pharisees saw them, they were saying to him, behold, your disciples are doing something which is illegal to do on the Sabbath. But he said unto them, have you not read what David did when he was hungry? And those who are with him, how he entered into the house of Jehovah, and he ate the bread of the table of Elohim Jehovah, that which was not legal for him to eat, neither for those who were with them, but rather for the priests only. Or have you not read that it is written in the law, or written in the Torah, that the priests in the temple profane the Sabbath and are blameless? But I say unto you, one greater than the temple is here. Whoop. One greater than the temple is here. But if you had known this, what this is, what this phrase is, I want mercy and not a sacrifice. Mercy? You would not have condemned those who are blameless. You see, he accused the Pharisees of weaponizing the Sabbath against the innocent. I've been talking about this for quite a while, weaponization. For the Son of Man is also master of the Sabbath. Right? That means if you go and stone your neighbor for breaking the Sabbath now, for doing work on the Sabbath, you will be held in judgment because you did the same thing. Because you did not have mercy. Mercy! Right here. Do you not? But if you would have known what this means, I want mercy and not sacrifice, you would have not condemned those who are blameless. So you claim to keep the Sabbath, do you? I don't. Do I recognize the Sabbath? The seventh day is the Sabbath? Absolutely. Absolutely. The Sabbath in no way loses its meaning. Why? I'll get to that in just a second, once I'm done with the next portion here. And Yehoshua departed from there, and he came to their synagogue. One man was there whose hand was withered, and they were asking him, and they said, is it legal to heal on the Sabbath? so that they might accuse him, so that they might use the Sabbath as a weapon against him. Once again, they didn't want mercy. Verse 7, but if you had known what this means, I want mercy and not a sacrifice, you would not have condemned those who are blameless. Now I'm going to get to the Gentiles here in just a few minutes here, as soon as I'm done with this. So that they might accuse him, and he told them, who is the man among you who has one sheep, and if it falls into the pit on the Sabbath day, will not take hold of it and lift it out? How much greater is a man than a sheep? Therefore, and he makes a judgment. The Messiah stands there and makes a judgment. Therefore, it is legal to do good on the Sabbath. And he said to the man, stretch out your hand. And he stretched out his hand and was restored like the other hand. And the Pharisees went out and they took counsel against him so that they might destroy him. Now, you know, I'm not going to go and point any finger at the Jew without pointing even more of them at the Gentile, because I stand with the Jews. But first, Isaiah. This is what he was talking about, or yes, right here, Isaiah 58. Verse 1, cry aloud, spare not, lift up your trumpet, voice like a trumpet, and show my people their transgression and the house of Jacob their sins. They seek me daily, and they delight to know my ways, as a nation that did righteousness. Then they forsook not the ordinances of Jehovah. They ask of me the ordinances of justice. They take delight in approaching to Jehovah. Why have we fasted, they say, and you don't see? What's going on? We're fasting and you don't see. Why have we afflicted our soul and you take no knowledge? Look, in the day that you fast, you find pleasure and you make all your laborers to work still. Behold, you fast for strife and debate, and to smite. You smite with a fist of wickedness. You may not fast this way. You are not allowed to do so, he says, to make your voice to be heard on high. Is this the kind of fast that I have chosen? A day for a man to afflict his soul? Is that what he's looking for? To bow down his head like a bulrush, or to spread sackcloth and ashes underneath of him? Will you call a fast in an acceptable day to Jehovah? No. He says no. Now comes instruction, folks. Verse 6. Now I'm going to, instead of the way that the translators did it, ask this as a question, I'm going to present it as an answer to a question. This is the fast that I have chosen: to loose the bands of wickedness, to undo all the heavy burdens, and to let the oppressed go free, and break every yoke. Break every yoke. I'm going to have to go back to Acts real quick. Acts. See here. It was right here. All right. This was concerning circumcision. And put no difference, verse 9, between us and them, and to purify their hearts by faith. Now therefore, why tempt you Jehovah to put a yoke upon the neck of the disciples, which neither our fathers nor ye were nor we were able to bear. To break every yoke. That you break every yoke. It is to deal your bread to the hungry, and that you bring the poor that are cast out of your house. And when you see them naked, that you cover them. And when you why would you hide yourself from your own flesh? You do this. He's not looking for fasting, afflicting your soul. Nope. 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 That's not what he's looking for. He just said it right here. He's not looking for that kind of fast, a day for a man to afflict his soul, to bow down his head as a bulrush and to spread sackcloth and ashes underneath of him. He's not accepted. That's not acceptable to him. No. This is what he wants. This is the fast that I have chosen, to loose the bands of wickedness, to undo the heavy burdens, and to let the oppressed go free, and break every yoke, that you deal your bread to the hungry, that you bring the poor, those that are cast out of your house. You know, they don't have a place to live. And when you see them without clothing, that you cover them, and that you do not hide yourself from your own flesh. Then shall your light break forth as the morning, and your health shall spring forth speedily, and your righteousness shall go before you. The glory of Jehovah shall be your reward. Then when you call, Jehovah shall answer. And when you cry out, he will say, I'm here. But you have to take away from the midst of you that yoke. That pointing of the finger. Take it away. And the speaking of vanity. So, because if you draw your soul to the hungry and satisfy the afflicted soul, then your light shall rise out of obscurity, and your darkness will be as the noonday. Now, he goes on and on and on and on and on. You see, we have a problem, though. A big, big, big problem. And I need to go to Jerusalem Post. You recognize him, don't you? Martin Luther. Now, I've gone over this particular article before by Shelley Neese, October the 18th, 2012. Some Protestants choose to highlight Luther's earliest writings when he defends and affirms the Jews. At 30 years of age, the Martin Luther of 1517 was a little-known Augustinian monk plagued by thoughts of his own sins and failings. Luther, in his own words, suffered from extremely disturbed conscience when his private meditation on the Scriptures revealed to him that the righteousness was a gift from Jehovah, born out of grace through the faith in, as they say, Jesus, but it's actually Yehoshua. He was relieved from his own damnation, but convinced more than ever that he had to work to eradicate false doctrine. The 95 Theses, which is credited for sparking the Protestant Reformation, however, when Luther nailed these theses to the door of the Castle Church in Wittenberg, Germany, his intention was merely to hold a public scholarly debate in the commercialization of the church by its selling of indulgences. In the rapid succession of events that followed, Luther was propelled from challenging church practices to condemning the church itself. Aided by the rise of the printing press, the prolific writings of Luther spread like a firestorm throughout Europe. I don't know why this has to keep doing this. You folks at Jerusalem Post need to fix this. To a growing literate public starving for teaching In 1521, Luther was summoned to the trial by Emperor Charles V at the Diet of Worms. Asked if he was willing to recant and retract his opinions on the Catholic Church, Luther famously replied, "Unless I am convinced by the testimony of the Scriptures or by clear reason, I am bound to the Scripture, and I have quoted, and my conscience is captive to the Word of God," as he said. With this rebuttal, Protestantism, the Christian doctrine which I have always subscribed to, was born. And of course, I believe she's speaking for herself, because I do not subscribe to Christian doctrine. What? I subscribe to the doctrine of Yehoshua, Israel's Messiah. I will continue. Luther and the Jews. As a Protestant, I have tortured feelings regarding the person of Martin Luther. This is not me. This is the writer of the article, please, folks. Luther must be credited for the revolution in Christianity that brought the Bible back to center stage. His eloquent teachings on salvation and justification may be taken for granted today, but they were nothing short of earth-shattering in the 16th century Europe. However, Luther had many personal shortcomings. A hypochondriac known for his hot temper and manic behavior, Mark A. There is obviously one fruit of the Holy Spirit that he was lacking, one among many. I will continue. Knoll, in his book Turning Points, writes, "It is not for propriety or diffidence that Luther is remembered in the history of Christianity. However, it is Luther's hateful teaching on the Jews that forever blackened his name, tainting his Reformation success." And it should. Yes, it should. Because he pointed the finger at the Jews. He did not talk about mercy as what was required in the book of Isaiah, Isaiah 58. You see. In the early years of his life, Martin Luther condemned the Catholic Church for its ill treatment of the Jews, and deemed Jewish obstinance toward conversion as reasonable given to the torturous treatment at the hands of the papacy. In his article, and I quote, "Jesus Christ was born a Jew," written in 1523, Luther sympathized with Jewish history, saying, "If I had been a Jew and seen such dolts and blockheads govern and teach the Christian faith, I would sooner have become a hog than a Christian." Because of statements like these and his love for Hebrew, Luther's Catholic enemies accused him of being a crypto-Jew trying to destroy the papacy. Now, Martin Luther criticized and condemned the Catholics, and rightly so. Why? Because they did not show mercy to the Jews. Because you see, the new covenant is about mercy. It is about forgiveness of sins. And if you claim to ascribe to the new covenant, there must be mercy rather than judgment. But they did not show mercy. And because the Catholic Church did not show mercy, how is mercy going to be shown upon them? It has to be reciprocal. So if no mercy was shown by the Catholic Church, then no mercy is going to be shown upon them. It has to be reciprocal. Trying to destroy the papacy. Luther, no doubt, believed that a reformed Christianity stripped of false doctrine and bound to the Scriptures would attract Jews to convert voluntarily. He often protested against forced conversion. He defended Jewish integrity, saying the Jews are blood related to our master. If it is proper to boast of the flesh and the blood, the Jews belong more to Messiah than we. At some point, Luther even met with Jewish apologists to explain his interpretation of certain Old Testament messianic passages. When they refused to accept his exegesis over their Talmud, Luther refused to ever meet with Jewish leaders again. When Jewish converts never materialized and Jews were no more inclined to Protestantism than Catholicism, Luther's views changed radically. Well, it means that Luther got exposed for what his real intentions were. A disillusioned Luther became a loudspeaker for the world's most ancient hatred. He began preaching violent anti-Semitic rants, publishing 5 treatises on the subject. It means that he was no different than the Catholics whom he condemned. He was no different in his heart. And when he condemned the Catholics for persecuting the Jews, and then he persecuted the Jews himself, guess what? He condemned himself. I will continue. In 1543, 3 years before he died, Luther wrote on the Jews and their lies, that awful, dreadful book that he wrote. Luther was known for a coarse writing style, a style popularized in that century with his many pamphlets, but this paper went to new depths and can arguably be called the first popular work of modern anti-Semitism. He warned Christians to be on guard against Jews, since in their synagogues nothing is found but a den of devils in which sheer self-glory, conceit, lies, blasphemy, and defaming of Jehovah, or as he put it, God, and men are practicing the most maliciously. Luther claimed that Jews had sunk to an abysmal, devilish, hellish, insane basement, envy and arrogance. He said they were full of the devil's feces, and that synagogue was an evil slut. Yeah, I gotta go find it again. And I doubt I'm going to read through the whole thing. Wow. This really, really bothers me. All right. He went on with such poisonous rhetoric for 65,000 words. Luther called on princes and nobles to burn down synagogues and Jewish schools, raze Jewish homes, forbid Jewish teachings on texts, confiscate Jewish wealth, and expel Jews from Germany. He had at one point even regrets that of their survival. We are at fault for not slaying them. Wait a minute. Whoa. Acts 15. Acts 15. They are supposed to refrain from shedding blood. From blood. You see. Luther's last words ever spoken from a pulpit was a declaration that if Jews refuse to convert, we should neither tolerate nor suffer their presence in our midst. Going beyond mere suggestions, Luther was complicit in driving Jewish citizens from Germany wherever he could. It is not difficult to read Luther's invective, calling Jews poisonous, envenomed worms, as a blueprint for a Nazi final solution which came 4 centuries later. British historian Paul Johnson said that Luther provided a giant step forward on the road to the Holocaust. Luther's biographers offer various explanations to justify his radical shift from praising the Jewish contribution to Christianity to calling for their expulsion from Germany. Reformation historian Heiko Obermann, in his book Luther, Man Between God and the Devil, paints a portrait of a man who could work himself up into a tirade about almost any subject, from papists to lawyers to Turks. Analyzing his diatribes against the Jews, Obermann believes that Luther was against the Jews from a theological standpoint, hating them for their alleged heresy, but not an anti-Semitic in a modern racial sense. Well, I disagree. I disagree with Obermann. He was full of venom and hate, including the racial sense. Either way, Luther's hatred fits that general definition of anti-Semitism as an irrational hatred of the Jews. Some of Luther's defenders dismiss his late-term Jewish obsession as a result of his many maladies. Historian Mark U. Edwards claims the increasing vitriol in Luther's later writings directly matches the deterioration of his health. Maybe he was demon-possessed. At best, this defense only tries to clear his name by pleading insanity. I don't think that demon possession clears a man. I don't believe it cleared Caligula, but that's another subject. Many scholars have written on the relationship between Luther's writings and Nazis' racial anti-Semitism, a task which fills volumes, as one must account for the vast changes in political and religious life in Germany over 4 centuries. Without recapitulating these contents, the general consensus is that the writings of Luther stoked the flames of anti-Semitism early in Germany's history. At the very least, they provided ready-made propaganda to warrant Hitler's program of Jewish annihilation. Though on the Jews and their lives had been dormant for 200 years, the Nazis resurrected Luther's text for their own purposes, displaying them during Nuremberg rallies. Hitler's educational minister, Bernhard Rust, claimed Luther as a German nationalist, saying, "I think the time is past when one may not say the name of Hitler and Luther in the same breath. They belong together. They are of the same old stamp." All right, I think that is enough of this article. Why then would anybody be a Lutheran? Actually, I think there's one more in here. Somewhere in here, down toward the bottom. Somewhere. Oh, look at this, folks. Anabaptists, listen up. Within Protestantism, a subset of scholars arose that, although not philo-Semitic, at least felt there was something to learn from Hebrew roots of Christianity. Johannes Reuchlin and Andreas Osiander, scholars whom tradition I follow more closely, are prime examples. Well, that's no excuse to call yourself a Lutheran, by the way, to the writer of this article. To read the Hebrew scriptures in their original language and historical context, Hebraist, is that me? Am I one of those? Perhaps? I mean, I don't know yet. I'm just looking at this as I'm reading this. As these Christians came to be known, I do not call myself a Christian. I refuse. Okay? Solicited the teachings of rabbis and Jewish theologians. Well, I don't do that either. Okay? So I guess I'm not one of them. Rejecting the Holy See's traditional interpretations, they wanted to find the lost meaning of the Bible. Some of these Hebraists, like Anabaptists, please listen, Anabaptists, went so far as to adopt certain Jewish laws like circumcision and the Sabbath of rest. But you know what? The Anabaptists did not raise a sword or a stone against their fellow man, you see. They did not condemn their fellow man. Now, at least not in those days. These days, they lean more toward Protestantism, which is not good. It's not good at all. For this, Protestantism was accused by Catholics as being a Jewish movement. So the Catholics accused the whole of Protestantism of being a Jewish movement merely because there were Hebraists like Anabaptists, which is of my family background, by the way, where they came from, went so far as to adopt certain Jewish laws, circumcision, and the actual seventh-day Sabbath, which they don't do anymore. They have swerved over to an unfortunate I would say, line of Protestantism that is much like Martin Luther. It is extremely unfortunate, and I wish they would not participate in this. I wish they would at least listen to their forefathers. Please, Anabaptists, listen to your forefathers. They had something right. Luther was horrified to find the extent to which some of his followers were taking the Old Testament studies. He worried that these Christians were vulnerable to Jewish proselytizing and had already contaminated by Jewish thought. In reaction, he wrote in 1538 against the Sabbatarians. Yes, against my people. Against my forefathers, who some were crypto-Jews, sure enough. When he gave his final scriptural argument for why, as he puts it, God had forsaken the Jews. But if he would have bothered to read Romans 11, the very first thing that Paul says, has Jehovah forsaken his people? Jehovah forbid. So if Martin Luther was speaking opposite of the words of Paul, then Martin Luther was a servant of the devil, which is why no one should ever call himself a Lutheran. In fact, you shouldn't even call yourself a Protestant. He also said that it was reasonable to assume that for 1,500 years since, as he puts it, Jesus, but his name is not Jesus, it's Yehoshua, that he says that Jehovah paid the law no heed. So why then didn't Martin Luther pay mercy any heed? It's either going to be mercy or judgment by the law. It's either one or the other. And if you're going to reject mercy, you're going to be judged by the law. He rejected mercy, folks. After Luther published against the Sabbatarians, he vowed to write no more either about the Jews or against them. How I wish that the principal architect of Protestantism paid heed to his own advice. Of course. Some Protestants choose to highlight Luther's earliest writings, which he defends and affirm the Jews. They ignore his later writings. Well, you can't. You can't, folks. Dismissing them as a product of his old age or worsening mental defects, many have simply never heard about the monk-turned-reformer position on Jews, and once confronted are tempted to defend the early Luther and reject the later. It is for those Christians that I am writing, according to what the writer is saying. The reality is that Luther's anti-Semitism simply cannot be ignored or dismissed on account of his perceived senility. The haunting persistence of his end-of-life diatribes were the putrid Protestant fertilizer. You can add your favorite four-letter word if you want to. It's probably more apt. That allows the roots of anti-Semitism to thrive in 20th century German soil. We Protestants must either accept Luther's Jewish theology for what it was and reject it for what it wasn't, anything resembling the loving essence of, as she puts it, Christian faith founded by a Jewish Messiah. The writer is vice president of the Jewish Connection, the Jerusalem Connection, a Christian Zionist organization in Washington. Well, I reject everything that is Martin Luther. Why? Because he rejected mercy. He chose judgment. I reject that. I choose mercy. I choose the new covenant. I choose the new covenant for Israel, where Jehovah is going to have mercy upon their sins, upon their iniquity, and remember their sins no more. Period. End of subject. No ifs, ands, or buts. I think that I have covered enough here. Once again, I am pleading with Anabaptists everywhere. You are my flesh and blood. All of you are my cousins. You are. We are an inbred group of people. We also have Jewish blood in us. If in any way we, I, me, myself, my brothers and sisters, my dad, my mother, my cousins, my uncles and aunts, if any of us to hate the Jews in our hearts, we hate ourselves and we condemn ourselves. You will never catch me wearing a cross. For the sake of the Jews, in remembrance of the Jews, and in condemnation for the merciless acts that were committed by Christians, both Protestant and the Catholics. This is a testimony against them.